In the heart of a chaotic world where people hustle endlessly and distractions scream louder than dreams, there lived a man whose life had quietly begun to crumble. He was a successful entrepreneur by society's standards, but inside he was empty, burnt out, lost, and barely holding on. Each day he woke up later than he meant to. His phone was the first thing he grabbed, emails the first thing he drowned in. There was no pause, no presence, just panic and pressure. And yet somewhere deep inside he knew this wasn't the life he was meant to live. One evening, weary from yet another unproductive day, he found himself at a leadership seminar. He sat at the back, arms folded, skeptical. The speaker promised transformation, clarity, and control. The man didn't believe in overnight miracles, but that night something shifted. It wasn't the speaker who moved him. It was an old man sitting quietly in the front row, dressed simply, unassuming but radiating calm and power. When the seminar ended and the crowd dispersed, the old man approached the entrepreneur. "You look like someone who's tired of pretending," he said with a soft smile. The entrepreneur blinked, unsure how to respond. "Come with me," the old man said. "What do you have to lose?" Against his own instincts, he followed. That decision changed everything. That old man turned out to be a billionaire, living far from the noise, mastering his day before the world even woke up. He introduced the entrepreneur to a concept that would shatter his limits and rebuild his life from the inside out. The secret? The 5 a.m. club. Waking up at 5 right in the morning, not just early for the sake of it, but structured, intentional, and sacred. A time carved out for elevation, of mind, body, and soul. At first, the entrepreneur resisted. "I'm not a morning person," he said, but the billionaire only smiled. "Neither was I," he replied, "until I decided to become one." He explained that great lives are built one great morning at a time, that 5 a.m. is the time of least distraction, when creativity flows unfiltered and willpower is strongest. Most people never tap into this gold mine of potential because they're too wrapped up in their excuses, too seduced by comfort. "The way you start your day determines how you live your day," he said. "Own your morning, elevate your life." The billionaire invited the entrepreneur, along with a talented but exhausted artist, on a journey. An experience designed not just to inform, but to transform. They traveled to faraway places, deserts, mountains, quiet retreats, where lessons were revealed not through lectures, but through living. The first rule they learned was the 20-20-20 formula. The first hour of their day was to be divided into 3 parts: move, reflect, grow. From 5 to 5:20 a.m. they were to move. High-intensity exercise to activate dopamine, boost metabolism, and energize the body. From 5:20 to 5:40 a.m. they'd reflect. Journaling, meditating, praying, breathing, stillness to anchor the soul. From 5:40 to 6 a.m. they would grow. Read powerful books, listen to audiobooks, review goals, learn something new. This first hour, this victory hour, was a sacred container, a ritual that tuned their focus, built their discipline, and fortified their spirit before the demands of the day could hijack their minds. At first it was hard. Waking up early felt like torture. Their old patterns screamed for comfort, for snoozing, for staying the same. But the billionaire taught them about the power of habit installation. He explained that change happens in 3 phases: destruction, installation, and integration. The first 22 days were messy and painful. The mind resisted, the body complained. But beyond that, the shift began. A new identity started to take root. Waking up early became normal. The silence of dawn became addictive. They began to crave growth more than comfort. They began to feel alive. Slowly, their entire lives changed. The entrepreneur, once scattered and reactive, became clear and intentional. He built systems, deepened relationships, and made bold moves. The artist, once insecure and blocked, found her voice again, creating powerful work, confident in her process. They weren't just waking up early. They were becoming the people they had always wanted to be. The billionaire showed them the importance of sleep too. Early rising wasn't about sacrificing rest, it was about honoring it. He taught them the sleep ritual, winding down at the same time every night, no screens, no chaos, only peace. Because elite mornings start the night before. The 5 a.m. club wasn't just a routine, it was a philosophy, a way of life, a declaration that they were no longer victims of their day, but architects of it. The early morning gave them solitude, clarity, and momentum. While the world slept, they were building empires internally and externally. One morning, as the sun rose over a quiet beach, the billionaire said, "The world belongs to those who master their mornings." It wasn't about money or fame. It was about freedom. Freedom from distraction. Freedom from anxiety. Freedom from mediocrity. Waking up at 5 a.m. was the portal to that freedom. The entrepreneur and the artist returned home changed. Their friends noticed. Their families felt it. Their work reflected it. They became radiant, focused, and grounded, not because of some magic pill, but because of a decision, a commitment, a discipline. The billionaire eventually disappeared as mysteriously as he had arrived, but his legacy lived on through them and through every person they touched. Because transformation once started cannot be contained. The 5 a.m. club became their way of life, and in time it can become yours too. But it begins with a choice to rise early, to fight resistance, to master your morning so you can own your life. Because while the world sleeps, legends are born, and you were never meant to be ordinary. You were meant to lead, to inspire, to live wide awake. So set your alarm, lay out your workout clothes, choose a powerful book, and when that alarm rings at 5 a.m., don't hesitate, rise, move, reflect, grow. Welcome to the club. The sun still hadn't risen when the entrepreneur stepped out onto the terrace of his villa. The air was crisp, the sky a canvas slowly awakening with light. A quiet stillness enveloped everything, the kind of silence that feels holy. He smiled. Just a few weeks ago, this moment would have never existed in his world. Now it was sacred. It was his time. The time when the world belonged only to the few who dared to rise while others slept. Beside him, the artist sipped warm tea, a gentle glow on her face. She too had begun to fall in love with these quiet hours. The solitude, the reflection, the sense of mastery. Both of them were living proof that waking up early wasn't just about getting more done. It was about becoming more. And the billionaire, ever calm and wise, was there to guide them further. Not just in the science of rising early, but in the art of living deliberately. Success, he said one morning, isn't about having more. It's about becoming more focused, more resilient, more disciplined, more connected to what truly matters. He taught them about the 4 interior empires, another core concept of the 5 a.m. philosophy. Most people, he explained, focus only on the external, money, status, possessions. But true greatness is built on 4 internal pillars: mindset, heart set, health set, and soul set. Mindset is the psychology, how you think, what beliefs drive your actions, how you interpret challenges. Heart set is your emotional health, cleansing past traumas, nurturing positive emotions, staying open to love and compassion. Health set is your physical well-being, the vitality, energy, and strength you bring into each day. Soul set is your spiritual anchor, your sense of purpose, your connection to something greater than yourself. Neglect any of these, the billionaire warned, and your foundation will crack. Strengthen them and you'll become unstoppable. Each morning they used their 5 a.m. hour to sharpen all 4. Exercise boosted their health set. Journaling healed their heart set. Reading expanded their mindset. Meditation deepened their soul set. Over time, they felt more aligned, more whole. The entrepreneur found himself making wiser business decisions, not from anxiety, but from clarity. The artist found herself creating deeper work, not from fear, but from flow. The billionaire also introduced them to the twin cycles of elite performance. High performers, he explained, understand that growth doesn't come from endless hustle. It comes from a rhythm, periods of intense focus and execution followed by deep rest and recovery. Push too long without pause and you burn out. Rest too much without action and you decay. The magic is in the balance. The entrepreneur learned to design his weeks around this rhythm. Intense work sprints followed by complete disconnection. The artist learned to protect her creative energy, saying no to distractions and yes to stillness. They began to value recovery as much as productivity. Another core lesson came in the form of the 90-91 rule. For the next 90 days, for the first 90 minutes of their workday, they were to focus on their single most important project. No emails, no meetings, no distractions. Just pure, deep work on what mattered most. That one habit alone transformed their output. By guarding their best hours for their most valuable work, they created at a level they'd never reached before. The billionaire often said, "Tragedy of life is not death. It's what we let die inside of us while we live. He challenged them to face their fears, heal their wounds, and reconnect with their greatness. He reminded them that each day is a gift, a blank canvas, and what you paint on it is entirely your choice. Mornings, he said, were the key. They set the tone, the mindset, the emotional frequency of the day. Start it distracted and the day is scattered. Start it with discipline and the day is yours. He taught them the importance of the joy of missing out, JOMO. Unlike FOMO, which drives us to check every notification, JOMO is about disconnecting from the noise and reconnecting to self. That meant less screen time, more nature, fewer likes, more life, less scrolling, more stillness. In this silence, they began to hear their true desires again, not the world's demands, but their soul's whispers. They journaled not just tasks, but truths, not just goals, but gratitude. They stopped chasing time and began dancing with it. And every morning, as the sky softened into gold, they felt reborn. They weren't perfect. Some days were harder than others, but they had momentum. And more importantly, they had identity. They no longer saw themselves as night owls or victims of time. They were creators, leaders, warriors of the dawn. One particularly powerful lesson came when the billionaire took them on a silent retreat. No talking, no phones, no external stimulation, just quiet, reflection, and walking through nature. The first day was uncomfortable. Their minds raced. Their hands twitched for their devices. But by day 3, something extraordinary happened. Their thoughts slowed. Their breathing deepened. Insight began to rise. In that silence, they discovered who they were beneath the noise. The artist uncovered childhood wounds that were blocking her creativity. The entrepreneur confronted the fear of failure that kept him stuck. They cried, they laughed, they healed. The billionaire smiled. Silence, he said, is the language of the soul. As they returned from the retreat, their transformations were visible. People noticed their presence, their clarity, their energy. Opportunities flowed, conflicts dissolved. Their work carried a new depth. They weren't just living, they were leading from within. In their final days with the billionaire, he shared one last truth. The smallest actions done consistently lead to the greatest results. It's not the grand gestures, it's the daily rituals, the early wake-ups, the focused hours, the quiet reflections. These are what shape empires. He reminded them that the 5 a.m. club wasn't a trend. It was a way of life. One rooted in ancient wisdom and modern science. One practiced by the greatest thinkers, creators, and leaders in history. From Benjamin Franklin to Maya Angelou, from Steve Jobs to Oprah, early rising had been their secret weapon. And now, it was theirs too. As the journey came to an end, the billionaire left them with a handwritten note. It read, "Live as if each morning is your rebirth. Own your days and you'll own your life. Wake up early, not just to rise before the sun, but to rise before your fears. You are stronger than you know. You are ready." And just like that, he was gone. But the legacy he left would never fade. The entrepreneur and the artist returned to their lives, but nothing was the same. They rose each day before the sun, not out of duty, but out of devotion. They led their teams with vision, they created with courage, they lived with purpose. They became lighthouses, shining examples of what's possible when you take full ownership of your morning. And now, their story passes on to you. You who is listening. You who is searching. You who knows deep down that there's more for you, more focus, more joy, more purpose. It doesn't start with changing your job or moving to a new city. It starts with a decision, a single alarm clock, a commitment to rise before the rest, to move, to reflect, to grow, to become who you were always meant to be. Welcome again to the 5 a.m. Club. As the days passed in the spellbinding location where the spellbinder had guided the entrepreneur and the artist, the transformation was becoming undeniable. The once scattered mind of the entrepreneur was now aligning with purpose, and the artist's inner critic had been replaced by a renewed creative fire. They were waking up each morning before the sun, standing by the balcony of the villa, watching the sky shift from indigo to gold as the sun rose like a promise of new beginnings. Robin Sharma's principles were now becoming habits. The 20-20-20 formula had evolved from theory to practice. They were moving, reflecting, and growing. Their minds were becoming sanctuaries and their hearts, previously filled with doubt, were starting to hold courage. One morning, the tycoon greeted them with a fresh smile. He seemed lighter, not just in spirit but in the way he walked, the way he carried silence between his words. He ushered them into the study and spoke in a whisper that somehow sounded louder than thunder. "You've begun to own your mornings, but now you must master the rest of your day." He unrolled a scroll from a leather case. It was a sketch titled "The Twin Cycles of Elite Performance." He explained how every high achiever operates in two cycles, the high excellence cycle and the deep recovery cycle. Without deep rest, your energy reserves drain. You may succeed for a while, but you'll burn out. The key is oscillation, pushing hard, then retreating into stillness. The entrepreneur nodded. The artist sketched the cycle on a page, embedding it into memory. The idea of working hard was familiar, but recovering like a pro, that was revolutionary. The tycoon's eyes twinkled. He pointed to the sketch. Your growth happens not just in your hustle, but in your rest. Your muscles grow not during your workouts, but in your sleep. Likewise, your mind sharpens in solitude. Then came the four interior empires: mindset, heart set, health set, and soul set. The tycoon explained, everyone talks about mindset, but true success, it's holistic. Your heart set, emotional intelligence, healing, forgiveness, is essential. Your health set, physical vitality, fuels your mental sharpness. And your soul set, your connection to purpose, to something greater, keeps you grounded. He handed them journals. Every morning, before your 20-20-20 routine, write what you're grateful for. Reflect on your heart set. Strengthen your soul set. Don't just upgrade your schedule, upgrade yourself. Over the next days, they wrote. They jogged before dawn, sweat glistening on their brows as the ocean breeze kissed their skin. They meditated in silence, breathing in rhythm with the waves. They read books that sparked their imagination. They turned off digital distractions, savoring the magic of being truly present. The artist painted with more freedom. The entrepreneur brainstormed bold ideas without fear. One evening during dinner under a canopy of stars, the tycoon leaned in and asked, "Do you feel the change inside you?" The entrepreneur smiled. "I'm not the same person who arrived here. I feel focused, clear, ready." The artist added, "I used to create from a place of fear. Now, I create from joy." The tycoon raised his glass. "Then you're ready for the next level." He introduced the concept of the 90-91 rule. For the next 90 days, spend the first 90 minutes of your workday on the one most important thing that will move your life forward. No distractions, no multitasking, just monomaniacal focus. You'll see results you've never imagined. He continued with the 60-10 method. Work with deep focus for 60 minutes, then take a 10-minute break to recover. Stretch, breathe, take a short walk, reboot your system. You're not a machine. You're a masterpiece in progress. Days turned into weeks. The routines became rituals. The rituals became a way of life. The villa became more than a place, and it became a mirror reflecting their highest selves. Then came the final lesson. The tycoon led them down a candlelit corridor, into a room lined with mirrors. At the center stood a simple wooden chair and a single white candle. He asked them to sit in silence for 1 hour. No talking, no movement, just being. It was the hardest hour of their lives. Their minds resisted. Their thoughts screamed. But slowly, as the minutes passed, something cracked. A stillness emerged. A knowing. A peace. When they emerged, the tycoon smiled. You've met yourselves. Not your titles, not your past, not your fears. Your true selves. That's who will lead you now. As their time in paradise drew to a close, they felt a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. They had arrived as seekers, uncertain and lost. They were leaving as warriors of light, armed with tools, rituals, and a deep knowing of their inner power. The 5 a.m. club was no longer a concept, it was their identity, a way of life, a declaration that they were no longer willing to live ordinary lives. They had chosen greatness. They had chosen themselves. And so, the sun rose once more over the horizon, painting the sky in gold as the entrepreneur and the artist stood side by side, ready to re-enter the world, not as who they had been, but as who they were always meant to be. They returned to their homes with the fire of transformation glowing in their eyes and hearts. But the true test was never in the learning. It was in the living. The artist found himself standing in front of a blank canvas in his modest studio back in his city. He stared at the colors, the brushes, the emptiness, but he didn't feel fear. He didn't hear the old voice whispering that he wasn't good enough. Instead, he smiled, lit a candle, and began painting as the sun was just beginning to rise. The entrepreneur walked into her office on a Monday morning, feeling the pulse of the place she used to dread. Her employees were surprised by her calm presence. She no longer barked orders or rushed through tasks. She flowed. Her energy was magnetic. She started her morning at 5 a.m., of course, with the 20-20 formula, and by the time others arrived, she was 3 hours ahead, not just in productivity but in clarity. The tycoon had not given them a vacation. He had gifted them a revolution, a method to take control of their lives in a world that tries to steal it every day. But like all great revolutions, it came with responsibility. They had to protect the rituals they'd built. The world wasn't going to make it easy. Notifications, demands, fears, old habits, they all tried to creep back in. The artist noticed it one evening, his phone buzzing during his sacred silence. He paused, remembered the tycoon's words. Guard your mornings, win the day. He turned off the phone and turned toward his canvas. The entrepreneur, too, faced her tests. Investors wanted quick results. Her team was skeptical of her new calm approach. But she didn't waver. She led with compassion, inspired through action, and became an example of what it meant to live intentionally. The tycoon had said it clearly. The world needs more heroes who are awake, disciplined, and centered, not more people running on autopilot. As weeks turned into months, both of them began sharing what they had learned, subtly, gently. The artist held a small exhibit of his new work, each piece radiating depth and truth. He titled the show Before the Sun. The entrepreneur introduced the 20-20-20 principle to her team, not as a rule, but as an invitation. Some laughed, some resisted, but a few tried it, and those few started to change. Then something unexpected happened. The artist received a message. It was from the tycoon. Just one line. How you live today is how you live your life. It hit him like a wave. He realized that every 5 a.m., every mindful breath, every moment spent in gratitude or growth wasn't just practice. It was life itself. The tycoon had never been trying to teach productivity hacks. He was giving them access to a richer, fuller, more awakened life. One where they were the authors, not victims. One where presence mattered more than perfection. One where growth was the goal, not applause. One early morning, the entrepreneur found herself journaling by candlelight. Her words poured onto the page not from ambition, but from alignment. She wrote, I used to chase success like a prize. Now I create value because it's who I am. I used to compete with others, now I collaborate with myself. Her handwriting was soft, but her conviction was unshakable. The tycoon had taught them something deeper than discipline. He had taught them devotion. Devotion to their own potential. Devotion to a life of meaning. Devotion to rising before the rest of the world, not to prove something, but to honor the gift of being alive. The world continued its rush. Deadlines, emails, distractions. But the artist and entrepreneur walked through it like warriors of peace. They didn't judge those still asleep. They simply embodied what was possible. People began to ask, what changed in you? And they smiled. Because the answer was not a course or a trick. It was a commitment. To rise at 5 a.m., to sweat, reflect, and grow. To protect their energy like gold. To prioritize what truly mattered. To live every day as if it was their last and their first. The artist once painted a piece called The Quiet Hour. It showed a figure standing on a mountain, arms stretched to the sky, as the first light of dawn broke through clouds. At the bottom he wrote, This is when I remember who I am. The entrepreneur spoke at a leadership summit. Her speech was titled Winning Begins Before Sunrise. She didn't speak about strategy or funding. She spoke about stillness. She spoke about self-mastery. She spoke about the sacred hour between 5 and 6 a.m. that had changed everything. And the room was silent, moved, inspired, because truth doesn't shout. It resonates. And what they now shared wasn't theory. It was truth lived, tested, and proven. And somewhere in another corner of the world, the tycoon was likely smiling. Another soul had risen, another leader had awakened, another human being had reclaimed their morning, and with it their life. The entrepreneur began to realize that mastery didn't mean perfection, it meant consistency. It was the small, seemingly insignificant wins every single morning that compounded into an extraordinary life. As she continued her 5 a.m. ritual, her mind became quieter, her reactions less sharp, her decisions more intentional. She no longer craved outside validation. She had found her rhythm within. The artist, too, transformed in ways even he couldn't explain. His brushstrokes became bolder, his compositions more expressive. He no longer created to be seen. He created because he could no longer contain the fire inside him. And that fire was kindled at 5 a.m. when the world slept and his soul whispered truths. The tycoon's teachings had taken root. But he had always known the truth. Rituals without reverence are routines, and routines eventually fade. But when you rise with purpose, when you greet each dawn with humility and gratitude, when you use that first hour to align your heart with your highest values, then the 5 a.m. hour doesn't just improve your life, it becomes your life. The entrepreneur hosted morning circles for her inner team. No slides, no agendas, just breathwork, gratitude, visioning. They called it the Power Hour. Slowly, her company culture shifted. People came in early, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Productivity soared, burnout dropped, and joy returned to work. The artist, inspired by the power of ritual, started a project called Rise Before the Sun. It was a global art initiative to capture the world's most creative people during their sacred hour. Writers, dancers, thinkers, dreamers, all captured in their solitude, creating in the silence of morning. It went viral. Because people weren't just hungry for success, they were starving for peace, purpose, and presence. And in that, the tycoon's vision had been realized. He had planted a seed in 2 souls. That seed had become a forest, and that forest now sheltered thousands. The tycoon, watching from afar, knew this was always the mission, not to be known but to spark knowing, not to teach but to remind, not to lead followers but to ignite leaders. And one crisp morning, just as the first birds broke the silence, the entrepreneur and the artist reunited. No cameras, no applause, just 2 souls walking a path of mastery. They smiled at each other. Not because they had reached the destination, but because they were still walking, still rising, still becoming. Every morning, the artist said, I remember who I am. And every morning, the entrepreneur replied, I become who I want to be. They looked to the horizon, where the sky glowed with new beginnings. And without needing to say it, they both knew. This wasn't the end of the 5 a.m. club, it was just the beginning. The beginning of a new kind of humanity, one that wakes with the sun, lives with the soul, and leads with the heart. As the days continued to unfold, the artist and the entrepreneur no longer needed reminders of who they were becoming. The 5 a.m. habit had rooted so deeply into their lives that it was no longer something they did. It had become who they were. It wasn't just a practice anymore. It was their identity. Waking up at 5 a.m. wasn't about productivity or crushing the competition. It was about rising into clarity before the world had a chance to confuse them. It was about meeting their soul before meeting anyone else's expectations. The tycoon's earlier lessons echoed in their minds each morning like ancient wisdom. Own your morning, elevate your life. They understood now that greatness doesn't arrive with fanfare or recognition. It's built quietly in the small hours when no one's watching. The entrepreneur began to live with more ease. She no longer rushed through meetings. She listened more. She judged less. Her leadership had transformed into stewardship. People followed her not out of fear, but because her presence made them feel more alive. And the artist. He no longer painted to impress the world. He painted because he felt most alive when he did. His mornings were sacred windows of inspiration. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, he was already at his easel, not chasing fame, but channeling truth. One morning, while journaling in solitude, the entrepreneur wrote something that would stay with her forever. The miracle isn't that I wake up at 5 a.m. The miracle is who I become when I do. She began to share her journey quietly through letters and reflections. And without seeking attention, Her words started touching thousands. The movement was growing, not as a trend but as a quiet revolution of consciousness. The tycoon, living in peaceful solitude far from the noise of the world, read the letters and watched the ripple effect. His work was never about him. It was always about awakening others to themselves. He smiled. Not the smile of pride, but the smile of someone who knows he has played his part in a greater symphony. Meanwhile, the artist launched an academy for young creators, but instead of teaching just technique, he taught morning mastery, emotional resilience, and creative presence. His students didn't just create art, they became art. The academy flourished not because of marketing, but because of meaning. People wanted more than skills. They wanted a new way of being, and the 5 a.m. philosophy gave them that. One evening, the entrepreneur visited a community where poverty, fear, and hopelessness were woven into daily life. But instead of bringing just donations or speeches, she brought structure. She introduced the children to the victory hour, journaling, movement, learning. At first, they resisted, but slowly, the morning ritual became their sanctuary. Grades improved, fights decreased, smiles returned. It was never about the hour. It was about what that hour unlocked: their true selves, their confidence, their belief. All the things the world had tried to steal. The entrepreneur sat under a tree one morning, watching those children run through their routines. She felt her chest tighten, not with stress, but with awe. This was what the tycoon meant. Lead quietly, serve deeply, change the world one soul at a time. Across the world, others joined the 5 a.m. movement. Farmers in rural lands began their day with gratitude circles. Teachers in crowded cities began with meditation. Parents replaced phone scrolling with storytelling. And slowly, the pulse of the planet began to shift. Not through noise, but through stillness. Not through rebellion, but through ritual. The world didn't need more speed. It needed presence. And presence begins when the sun is still quiet. The artist and the entrepreneur reunited for a global gathering. Not a conference, not a brand launch. Just a quiet retreat for those living the 5 a.m. philosophy. No stages, no spotlights. Just open hearts and sacred sunrises. They spoke very little, because there was a knowing now and deeper than words. In the stillness of each morning, people were finding themselves again. And that was the real miracle. The tycoon never returned for a grand farewell. He didn't need to. His work was never meant to end with applause. It was meant to ripple silently, like the softest whisper across time. And so, as the sun rose each day across mountains and seas, across cities and villages, the world changed. Not loudly, but profoundly. One 5 a.m. at a time. And so, as the sun rose each day across mountains and seas, across cities and villages, the world changed. Not through monumental declarations, but through small, sacred victories. The 5 a.m. club had become more than a practice. It had become a path, a sacred ritual, a quiet resistance against mediocrity. The people who once thought they weren't enough now walked with quiet confidence. Not arrogance, but grounded certainty. They knew that every morning they showed up for themselves was a declaration of worthiness. Each day they chose to rise early. They said to the universe, "I am ready to grow. I am ready to serve. I am ready to live fully." The entrepreneur had now become a symbol, but she resisted the spotlight. Her joy was in mentoring others, sitting with small groups, listening more than speaking. When someone asked her the secret to her transformation, she said, "It wasn't the morning. It was the meaning I found in the morning." She remembered her first day on the beach, how lost she had felt, how broken, and now she wasn't fixed. She was free. Because the 5 a.m. discipline had not made her perfect, it had made her whole. The artist continued to paint, but now his works carried a new energy. They weren't just colors on canvas, they were meditations, silent sermons. His art studios turned into sanctuaries. People came not just to see his work, but to feel their own spirit reflected back. He never charged for morning sessions. The sunrise is free, he'd smile. So should the soul be. The tycoon, even in his absence, remained present. His teachings had spread far beyond the original trio. Now monks in monasteries, leaders in boardrooms, athletes in training grounds, and mothers in kitchens all quoted his lines. Own your morning, elevate your life. The world rewards the dedicated. Solitude is the soul's oxygen. One day, a young boy from a village where water was scarce began waking up at 5 a.m., not to read or to exercise, but to fetch water for his family before the heat arrived. He'd do it with a smile. Because in that quiet hour, he felt like a warrior. His ritual wasn't glamorous, but it was sacred. And this, perhaps, was the greatest truth of all. The 5 a.m. club wasn't about what you did. It was about who you became. In a world chasing likes, applause, and attention, these early risers chased meaning. While the world scrolled, they scribed. While others consumed, they created. While many hit snooze, they hit reset. Years passed. The entrepreneur, now older and deeply wise, sat in a quiet garden. She no longer needed the alarm. Her body rose with the sun as naturally as the tides kissed the shore. She looked at the sky, the same sky she'd once watched in confusion, now a mirror of her calm. She whispered a prayer of thanks, to the tycoon, to the artist, to the ritual, and most of all to herself. The garden filled with young voices. Her grandchildren, full of curiosity, asked, "Grandma, why do you wake up so early?" She smiled and answered, not with a lecture, but with a story. The morning mist clung gently to the earth as if reluctant to release the night's final whispers. In the stillness, a new member of the 5 a.m. club tied her shoelaces and stepped out into the dew-covered world. She was a school teacher from a remote village where electricity was unreliable, but purpose ran deep. Inspired by a whisper of a story she had once overheard at a bus stop, something about a club that met the sunrise and transformed lives, she made the decision to rise early. She didn't own fancy gadgets. Her notebook was handmade and her pen a gift from a student. But what she did possess was something far more potent: intention. Each morning, before the first rooster crowed, she sat beneath a neem tree, journaling lessons for her students, practicing breathwork, and mapping dreams far larger than her surroundings. She didn't do it for glory. She did it because she knew transformation begins in the quiet. And that's where the real essence of the 5 a.m. club continued to thrive, not in grand gestures, but in consistent, quiet revolutions of the soul. Across the world, in a buzzing metropolis, a tech entrepreneur who had once burned out chasing funding and fame had found his redemption in those same morning hours. He'd once mocked the concept. Wake up early to be successful? He laughed. Success doesn't punch a time card. But burnout humbled him, so he gave it a shot. At first, his mind rebelled, his body ached. But day by day, something softened. He began to hear the wisdom in silence. His creativity reignited. The innovation he'd once chased in chaos now arrived in calm. He built his company anew, not on hustle, but on harmony. The 5 a.m. club wasn't his strategy. It was his sanctuary. Meanwhile, the artist, now revered across continents, held retreats on cliffs and coastlines where creatives came not to learn techniques, but to remember presence. He spoke less and painted more. And when he did speak, it was poetry. Your morning is your mirror. Whatever you pour into it, it reflects throughout your day. One morning during such a retreat, he painted a single circle on a blank canvas. Attendees stared, waiting. "Is that it?" someone asked. He smiled. "This," he said, "is the sun, and this empty space, it's your time. Fill it wisely." That minimalist painting became a symbol. It was replicated on walls, screens, journals, and minds. A circle, a sunrise, a choice. In another corner of the globe, the entrepreneur, once a hesitant skeptic, now spoke at leadership summits. But she didn't preach productivity hacks or growth metrics. She told stories, real ones, of how the quietest hour changed the loudest doubts, of how discipline brought dignity, of how in a world obsessed with faster, she had found freedom in slower, deeper beginnings. She spoke not to impress, but to awaken. Her audience left not with notes, but with nudges in their soul. They began waking earlier, not because she told them to, but because they felt called. The 5 a.m. club became folklore, a myth that was real, a secret that was everywhere. But still, it belonged to the few who chose it, not just once, but daily. A farmer in Brazil woke early to speak to his crops. "Plants listen better before dawn," he'd say, laughing. A retired dancer in Japan began her days with gentle movements under the cherry blossoms. My body may slow, she whispered, but my spirit still dances. A mother in Nigeria used her 5 a.m.s to write letters to her future self, reminding the woman she would become of the strength she once forgot she had. And in each of these lives, the same truth echoed. When you own your morning, you reclaim your power. Not in dramatic upheavals, but in subtle recalibrations. One breath, one thought, one step at a time. Over time, the world didn't just witness the power of the 5 a.m. club. It evolved through it. Schools introduced sunrise mindfulness. Hospitals offered 5 a.m. recovery rituals. Prisons allowed morning meditations. And slowly, a culture emerged, not built on fear or frenzy, but on grace, on grounded beginnings, on giving oneself the gift of time. The artist, now in his winter years, once said to a young painter, "Paint with the sunrise and your soul will remember who it is." The young man asked, "But what if I miss it?" The artist smiled gently. "Then you'll learn the most important lesson of all, that discipline isn't punishment. It's a love letter to your future." That single line became etched on countless journals, a mantra, a memory, a mission. As the final chapter of this transformative journey begins, the world is no longer the same. Those early morning risers, the ones who dared to wake when the stars were still out and the world was hushed, have created a quiet revolution. A revolution not built on noise or recognition, but on personal mastery, on deep, unshakable commitment to self-elevation, on love. As the sun rises on one final morning, the original artist, the very man who once whispered truths into a jaded entrepreneur and a lost artist, sits quietly by a lake. His hair is gray now, and his hands, once firm and precise, now tremble with wisdom. But his eyes, they shine, with peace, with knowing. He opens his leather journal, worn and weathered, and pens one last message. Not to his followers, not to the world, but to time itself. "Dear morning, you held me when the nights were cold. You heard me when no one else listened. You reminded me every single day that I'm not behind, not broken, not forgotten. You gave me space to begin again, thank you." He closes the journal, smiles, and simply sits. No need to lead anymore. No need to speak. His legacy was never meant to be loud. It was meant to be lived. Meanwhile, the entrepreneur, now a mentor to global leaders, stands on the stage of a vast auditorium, not to deliver a TED Talk or promote a product, but to give her final public speech. She doesn't show slides. She shows silence. She begins, "The most important thing I've ever built wasn't a company. It was a morning habit. One sacred hour, one decision repeated daily, one commitment to myself. That's what changed everything." She pauses and looks out at thousands, all silent. You don't need a perfect morning, you just need to meet yourself in it. That's where your truth lives. That's where your greatness hides. Wake up not just from sleep, but from distraction, from fear, from smallness. Wake up to yourself. Applause doesn't erupt. Instead, tears do. In rows and rows, people begin to realize that no guru, no system, no app, nothing external, can replace what lives inside the human spirit when it is fully awakened. In a quiet bookstore in Italy, an artist who once lost himself in chaos now sells small prints of sunrises. Not for money, but for memory. Each painting he gives includes a handwritten note. "This sun belongs to you, rise with it." One morning, a little girl walks in. She looks up at the man and says, "My dad says you're the man who paints mornings." He kneels down and replies, "No, sweetheart, you are. Every day you get to paint your life. Use your light wisely." All over the world, the philosophy of the 5 a.m. Club isn't just remembered, it is lived. Not as a trend, not as a tactic, but as truth. In the humblest villages and the highest boardrooms, in schools and in sanctuaries, in prisons and in palaces, people have reclaimed their mornings, and by doing so, they have reclaimed their power. They don't all do it the same. Some meditate, some move, some write, some sit in stillness, but they all rise. They rise not to compete, not to impress, but to align with purpose, with love, with the quiet rhythm of their own souls. And now, as this story comes to a close, what remains is not just knowledge, not just strategy, but energy. The energy of transformation. The energy of remembering that life doesn't happen to us, it responds to us. That we don't find time, we create it. That we don't wait for change, we become it. So if you're listening to this right now, know this. This story wasn't about a secret club, it was about you, about the part of you that knows there's more. More clarity, more joy, more strength, more depth. And that more doesn't come in the middle of the day when emails pile up and the world screams. It comes in the stillness, in the dark, in the quiet, at 5 a.m. The final message, written across the last page of the artist's journal, reads, "Own your morning, elevate your life. Because when the world is asleep, your destiny is awake. This is not the end. It's the beginning of yours. The sun is rising. Are you?"